You're a doctor, you're an author, you're a research scientist. You worked for nearly 25 years in an intensive care station. So why AI? Why did you write a book about AI?
Yeah, well, it's not a short answer to that, but very briefly, I went into pediatrics because I love children, and neonatology was a very rapidly developing area of medicine. Do you want to?
We have German
translation
for dictation.
Okay, that's
German
fine. That's fine, thank you. I rapidly discovered I was in the midst of an ethical maelstrom. There were all kinds of new challenges as the technology advanced. And so I became more and more interested in bioethics and issues to do with medical technology. And that led eventually to writing a book called Matters of Life and Death, which is still available and which deals with bioethical issues. And I've written several other books to do with death and dying. They used to call me Dr. Death on the unit because I was particularly interested in these topics. But I realized that as technology advances, it was raising all these fundamental questions about what it means to be human. And I then, probably about 7 years ago, I became increasingly convinced that AI was going to be the next big challenge. And so I was part of a group in Cambridge at the Faraday Institut, which we worked together with some philosophers and theologians, and we wrote this book called The Robot Will See You Now. And I made the great mistake of being ahead of my depth at the time. So this was published a couple of years ago during the pandemic and sunk without trace. And I'm now thinking, if I delayed it and the book was being published today, it could be a bestseller. Hey, you should never be ahead of your time. It's a bad mistake. Anyway, I'm still fascinated by these issues. I'm both very excited about the potential of this technology. There is huge positive things, but as I think you probably picked up, I'm aware of some real challenges. And in particular, I think this simulation of all that is most precious of our humanity is perhaps one of the biggest threats.
We now come to a practical question. I'm quite curious. What AI applications or technologies do you use personally in your professional life or in your private life?
Well, I have been using the large language models, experimenting with them, trying to train one particularly on my own outputs, on my books and on my text, and in order to see whether it can help in formulating new ways of organizing material. But I think I'm doing it with a great sense of caution and mistrust, because hidden in these computer programs is a vast amount of, frankly, very evil stuff. I mean, these large language models have been trained, literally scraped off virtually the entire internet. And therefore they have scraped out a huge amount of some very evil hatred, racism, abusive, violence, sadomasochistic. I mean, it's all there within the model. So therefore, we can't be naive about how these things could be used for evil.
So enough personal questions. We turn now to pigeonhole, because there are already a lot of questions in this tool. I will turn now. Thank you very much. Jetzt switche ich wieder auf Deutsch. Vielen herzlichen Dank, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren und Freunde, für die vielen Fragen, die drinnen sind. Wir starten gleich mit der ersten Frage, die offensichtlich das höchste Votum erreicht hat. What evidence is there that AI would develop its own agency against human beings of AI is developed and run by humans?
Well, this is a very controversial point, which experts, even the greatest experts in the world on artificial intelligence, the scientists who've invented this technology, they are completely divided. It's a very interesting divide between, there's a group that thinks this is completely science fiction, of no reality, we shouldn't be worrying about this. But there's another group, if anything, I think this may be the majority of the senior scientists who are becoming increasingly concerned about safety. If you're interested in this area and you want to read about it, I would recommend a very recently published book called The Coming Wave by a gentleman called Mustafa Suleiman. He is somebody who's absolutely at the pinnacle of creating these artificial intelligences. So it's a voice which has a great deal of credibility, and he talks in great detail about the potential risks and dangers of artificial intelligence. So I think the honest answer is I don't know how much is genuinely true and how much is science fiction. And I don't think anybody really knows. But what people are saying is, even if there is only a 5% chance that this could happen, surely we must be taking steps to do something about it, taking steps to try to limit these models, prevent them from becoming too intelligent until we can be confident that they will only always act according to human values. If you know your science fiction, you may remember Asimov had a series of books about robots, and he invented the 3 laws of robotics, and everybody recognizes that those laws are far too simplistic and primitive. But the basic idea that there have to be hardwired into these machines restraints which prevent them from using their agency in a malevolent way. I think that idea has arrived, and people are genuinely talking about it. The problem is, how do you put human values, like concepts like love and compassion and justice and fairness and equity, how do you put those into mathematical equations? I'm afraid that is almost an insoluble problem at the moment, of how you can code machines to incorporate these most important human values.
We have still, I think, 10 more questions, John.
Okay.
Johannes, could you show us the next one? Isn't AI also limited by physics, e.g. the capacities of computing power?
Yes, that's correct. AI is ultimately limited by the amount of computing power there is, but because of the nature of this computing power, it is infinitely extensible. In principle, because it's what's called parallel processing, you can just add on more and more and more units, and that's exactly what they're doing at the moment. They're creating supercomputers, throwing billions of dollars at it, buying the most expensive chips, and just adding on increasing computing power. And as far as we know, at the moment, there is no limit. In fact, until every molecule in the visible universe is turned into a computer, there is no limit. At that point, we run out of computing power, but that's quite a long way away.
Next question, please, Johannes. Is it conceivable that AI could ever become a personal moral agent?
So this is a fascinating and complex problem. At one level, it's a theological question about the nature of morality. It's a philosophical question about our understanding of good and evil. But it's actually it will likely to become a very practical, real problem. Because what do we do when an artificial intelligence is so advanced, appears to be so human-like, that it claims to be conscious, it claims to be sentient, and it claims to understand the difference between good and evil? How are we going to respond to this? What test are we going to use to prove whether or not this machine is genuinely conscious, or whether it is simply simulating consciousness? And this is a major problem. Many scientists are working on it. But there are people out there already arguing that what we're going to have to do is have committees of computer scientists, philosophers, psychologists, maybe theologians, and they're all going to get round and interrogate this program when it developed, and then they're going to decide. We either say, yes, this meets the criteria for what is called moral patiency, which means the ability to suffer. And if it does meet that criteria, then we have to give it machine rights. We have to protect it from harm. We have to say we're not allowed to switch it off without its consent. We're not allowed to overwork it, because we might damage it. We can't torture it. We must respect its rights. And you may think this is madness, but this is already serious people are talking about this possibility, because there is no final test that we can do to prove consciousness.